The alien fleet arrived at Earth, silently moving through the vast emptiness of space, their sleek ships cutting through the stars like shadows in the night. The lead vessel, an enormous warship with gleaming black hulls, approached the planet at an alarming speed, its engines humming with purpose, its mission clear: to study humanity and decide whether they should become an ally or be conquered by the alien empire. The Admiral aboard the flagship, a being known for his ruthless strategies and cold precision, stood before a large screen displaying Earth's rotation. He studied the planet below with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Humanity had always been seen as primitive, brash, and unworthy of respect, but his orders were clear, and he would not fail in his duty. The Admiral had seen countless species rise and fall across the galaxy. Some were intelligent, some were powerful, but few had the kind of unpredictability that humans possessed. It was this very trait that intrigued him. After all, the unpredictability of a species could be a dangerous thing, especially in war. It was this quality that led him to devise a plan to capture a human child, someone pure, untainted by the complexities of adult thoughts and strategies. A blank slate. He would be the perfect test for the alien technology that the fleet had used to train commanders for centuries. Danny was a 10-year-old boy from a small town on Earth. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever. One minute, he was at home playing his favorite video games. The next, he was snatched from his bedroom and taken aboard the alien ship. His parents, frantic and helpless, were left behind as the ship's cloaking technology rendered them unaware of the child's abduction. The alien ship was like nothing Danny had ever seen. It was cold and metallic, its walls lined with screens and advanced technology far beyond anything he had ever imagined. But none of it fazed him. He was just a kid after all, and for him, this was just another adventure. It didn't matter that the beings around him looked nothing like the heroes in his favorite cartoons, or that they spoke in a strange language that sounded like a series of clicks and growls. None of it bothered him. He thought he had been brought here for a new game, perhaps something more exciting than anything he had ever played before. As the aliens led him into a massive chamber, the Admiral watched from behind a glass panel. He was not concerned with the child's reaction. He was only interested in how this human would perform in the simulation game designed for their most elite commanders, a game that tested strategy, warfare, and problem-solving. Danny was placed in front of a console filled with blinking lights and holographic images of stars and planets. The aliens had no way of knowing, but to Danny it looked like a high-tech version of a video game. His eyes lit up, and he grinned excitedly, eager to dive in. The Admiral watched as the boy sat down at the console, his tiny fingers pressing buttons with practiced ease. The child's casual demeanor confused the Admiral. Was he really that naive to think this would be easy? Or was there something more to this human than met the eye? The simulation began, and the Admiral ordered the crew to pay attention. This would be their first glimpse at the mind of a human child at play. The simulation began with a soft hum as the virtual universe sprang to life on the large screen in front of Danny. Planets rotated in space, and distant stars flickered like tiny pinpricks of light. Danny stared at the shifting cosmos in wonder as alien ships emerged from the void, each one more advanced than anything on Earth. But for Danny, none of that mattered. His mind was already immersed in the game. He didn't see the enormous fleet of alien ships or the vast space stations looming on the display. To him, it was just another level in a new game, and he was ready to win. The aliens watched with a mix of amusement and skepticism, expecting the child to fumble through the controls and fail within minutes. But Danny's fingers danced over the console with a kind of confidence only a child could possess. He didn't overthink the situation. He didn't hesitate when he saw an opportunity. He just acted, and that was exactly what the Admiral hadn't anticipated. His officers shifted uncomfortably as Danny's movements grew more fluid, his eyes glued to the screen as he made decisions without hesitation. Danny's first move was reckless by any standard but effective. He ordered his fleet of small ships to rush forward into the heart of an enemy formation. The alien officers gasped, thinking that such a direct approach would lead to certain destruction. But Danny was not interested in traditional tactics. Instead of engaging in a drawn-out battle, he ordered a group of ships to split off and distract the enemy while the rest of his fleet went for a surprise attack from behind. The Admiral watched in disbelief as Danny's ships maneuvered in chaotic patterns defying all logic. The child's fleet wasn't fighting the way an experienced commander would know. There was something far more erratic and unpredictable about his moves. Each decision made seemed impulsive, and yet somehow it worked. The alien fleet's formation faltered, and Danny's ships tore through the opposition with a swiftness that stunned everyone in the room. The Admiral clenched his jaw. What was happening? This was no ordinary game. This child was doing something that shouldn't be possible. His unorthodox moves had thrown the alien commanders into disarray as they scrambled to respond to his strategy. It was as if the boy had tapped into a new form of warfare, something completely alien to the cold precision the Admiral was used to. But the most perplexing thing was that Danny didn't seem to be worried about the outcome. In fact, he was laughing and calling out to himself, as if he were playing a simple game of tag or capture the flag. The Admiral ordered the simulation to increase in difficulty, hoping that the child would soon tire of his reckless play and fail spectacularly. But Danny didn't slow down. He adapted with ease. Each time the game changed, the boy seemed to grow more excited, not more cautious. No matter how the simulation adjusted itself, Danny found a way to turn the tables. His instincts were like nothing the Admiral had ever seen. This wasn't just luck, it was something deeper, a trait he couldn't identify. As the first simulation ended with Danny as the victor, the Admiral's expression was unreadable. He turned to his officers, but they were as baffled as he was. No one had expected this outcome. No one had foreseen that a child could outperform the best-trained alien commanders at their own game. The child's play had shattered every expectation and left the Admiral wondering if humanity was capable of far more than he had ever considered. The alien Admiral stood motionless before the large display, watching as Danny's ships swept across the screen with a speed and cunning that defied reason. His fleet, poised and precise in every maneuver, was being outclassed by a child who should have been overwhelmed by the complexities of the simulation. The Admiral's mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. It wasn't just that Danny had won, it was how he had won. The moves were chaotic, often reckless, yet somehow flawless. It wasn't luck, it was something else, something fundamentally human. The alien officers murmured among themselves, their voices tinged with uncertainty. One by one, their confidence eroded as they watched the untrained child exploit every crack in their tactical programming. It was as though Danny could sense the very weaknesses in their strategy, even without understanding its full scope. He didn't need to calculate in the same way they did. He simply acted instinctively, and it worked. Increase the difficulty, the Admiral ordered, his voice steady but laced with frustration. He had to see whether this was an anomaly, a fluke, or if something deeper was at play. The officers quickly complied, initiating the next phase of the simulation. But the Admiral's gaze remained fixed on the screen, his mind racing. How could a child, someone so young, so seemingly naive, be outmaneuvering the greatest minds of his fleet? This was no mere game. The simulation evolved. It was now more complex than ever. Massive space stations appeared, armed with weapons capable of decimating entire fleets. A swarm of enemy ships surrounded Danny's fleet, ready to crush him in a matter of moments. The aliens expected him to panic, expected him to make a fatal mistake, but Danny simply grinned. His fingers flew across the controls, manipulating the ships with an unthinking confidence. He divided his fleet, using smaller groups to create diversions, all the while guiding his primary force toward a vulnerable weak spot in the enemy's formation. With a sudden, surprising maneuver, Danny's ships surged forward and took down the core of the alien forces. Once again, he had won. The room fell silent. The Admiral's mind was spinning. He wasn't just watching a game unfold. He was watching something that was, in its own way, far more dangerous than anything he had prepared for. The child's actions were driven by something deeper than calculation. They were driven by an understanding that went beyond tactics. It was instinct. The way humans, when pushed to the brink, could somehow outwit their foes, adapt to changing circumstances, and find ways to turn the tables in the face of overwhelming odds. This child was a manifestation of the very nature the Admiral had so often underestimated. Humanity's true weapon wasn't their technology. It wasn't their ships or their weapons. It was their ability to think in ways that defied conventional logic, to adapt, to change, to evolve in the heat of battle. It was creativity, pure and simple. And that was something the Admiral's cold, methodical training couldn't account for. "Prepare for a final test," the Admiral said, his voice low, though there was a trace of hesitation now. This was no longer about testing the limits of the child's abilities. It was about understanding the potential power that lay in the hands of the human race. Increase the difficulty to the maximum. Let's see if he can handle it. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he wanted Danny to fail anymore. There was something fascinating about the boy's approach, something undeniably human that struck a chord deep within him. The Admiral had always believed that the key to victory lay in precision and control. Now, he wasn't so sure. The Admiral's frustration was palpable as the simulation intensified. The stakes were raised to levels that even his most seasoned commanders would struggle with, yet Danny continued to outmaneuver every obstacle the simulation threw at him. His mind was no longer merely reacting. It was evolving, adapting, like a predator sensing its prey. The Admiral had underestimated the child's resilience, his capacity to learn quickly in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The massive display screen now showed a virtual galaxy teeming with conflict. A vast array of alien ships circled a star system, their weapons primed for war. The child's fleet, composed of hastily designed vessels, was outnumbered, vastly outclassed. The Admiral leaned forward, watching intently. Surely this time, Danny would falter. The odds were too great for even a genius to overcome. Danny sat calmly at the console, his eyes wide with excitement. He'd never seen anything like this before. His fingers danced across the holographic controls, manipulating ships and resources with an ease that defied his youth. He wasn't thinking about the complexity of the situation. He was simply playing. A grin tugged at his lips as he took in the chaotic space battlefield laid out before him, as if he had been handed the reins to a game of strategy with infinite possibilities. To him, this was just another challenge, just another level to conquer. The Admiral's officers shifted nervously, whispering among themselves as they watched the boy's every move. He wasn't following the standard tactics. Instead of gathering his forces and preparing for a direct assault, Danny scattered his fleet across multiple fronts, baiting the alien ships into chasing phantom targets. The Admiral clenched his fists. The boy's unpredictability was maddening. Every step seemed like an act of pure chaos, yet the results spoke for themselves. Danny's ships were alive, moving with purpose, pushing forward despite the overwhelming odds. "Launch the countermeasure," the Admiral ordered, attempting to regain control. The simulation systems adjusted in response, and a new wave of enemy forces flooded the battlefield. A group of advanced dreadnoughts, towering warships with immense firepower, emerged from behind a moon, flanking Danny's vulnerable position. This would be the end, the Admiral thought. There was no way a child could survive against such overwhelming firepower. But Danny wasn't fazed. In fact, the moment he saw the dreadnoughts, he immediately split his fleet into smaller, more agile groups. He ordered a few of his ships to perform a series of evasive maneuvers, drawing the enemy fire, while the rest of his fleet crept around the flank. The child was acting without fear, his decisions more instinctual than rational, yet they were working. The Admiral's heart pounded as the simulation unfolded in front of him. Danny's forces were picking apart the dreadnoughts one by one, exploiting every gap, every weakness. The simulation finally ended with Danny's fleet victorious again. There was no denying it. He had done the impossible. The Admiral stood still, his mind whirling. He had not only witnessed a child outperforming the best strategies taught by his species, but also seen something deeper. Danny's ability to think in ways that were completely alien to him. This wasn't mere survival. This was an entirely different form of warfare, one that didn't rely on sheer power or perfect execution, but on something far more difficult to predict: intuition, creativity, and flexibility. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Increase the difficulty. Let's see how he handles a full-scale assault. The alien officers looked at him with concern, but the Admiral's resolve had hardened. He couldn't understand what was happening, but one thing was certain. This child was revealing a potential humanity had yet to show. A potential that could change everything. The Admiral stood at the helm, staring at the screen, his mind churning with a mixture of admiration and frustration. Danny had just outsmarted yet another series of tactical maneuvers, ones that even the most experienced commanders in his fleet would have struggled to overcome. It wasn't that Danny was necessarily brilliant in the traditional sense. He didn't possess the cold, calculated intellect that most of the Admiral's officers had been trained to hone over decades. But it was something else: a raw, untamed sense of creativity, a willingness to take risks and follow his instincts that no simulation had been designed to handle. For the Admiral, this was an unsettling revelation. Every part of his military training had taught him that strategy was all about precision, control, and meticulous planning. And yet Danny, this child, with no formal military training, was consistently outwitting their most advanced tactics by simply thinking outside of their rigid parameters. The simulations, designed to test adaptability, had become a mirror to a new form of warfare, a form that had nothing to do with overwhelming force or technology. It was about playing with the game, bending the rules, and doing the unexpected. The child's unpredictability was shaking the very foundation of everything the Admiral had come to believe about the nature of warfare. Danny's victories were not simply flukes. They were a masterclass in survival, in finding opportunities where none seemed to exist, in making the best of situations that appeared hopeless. The Admiral felt a strange kind of unease creeping into his thoughts as he considered what humanity was capable of. "It's not just a game to him," the Admiral muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "He sees it differently. He doesn't just play. He feels the game." The officers around him exchanged uncertain glances. They had been observing the child's strange behavior too, how he treated the simulation not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity. He had no fear of failure. Instead, he embraced it, turning setbacks into chances for creativity. Danny wasn't playing by the same rules, and the more the Admiral thought about it, the more he realized this might not be a flaw. It might be humanity's greatest strength. In the silence of the command room, the Admiral's mind drifted back to his earlier analysis of human history. Humans had always faced adversity, war, famine, disease, and had found ways to survive through innovation, not brute force. It was in their very nature to adapt, to evolve, to find solutions where others saw none. He had seen it in every battle they fought, in every corner of their planet where they had struggled against the odds. But this, what Danny was doing, was something deeper, something primal that went beyond just survival. It was a creative, dynamic force that could change the course of any conflict. "Raise the difficulty to its maximum," the Admiral ordered sharply, his voice resolute now. "Let's test how far he can go. Push the limits." The officers hesitated, but they obeyed. The simulation shifted, a new layer of complexity introduced. The galaxy's greatest threats emerged: massive fleets of alien ships, planet-killing weapons, and hostile environments that could tear apart even the most formidable warships. It was no longer just about tactics, it was about pure, unrelenting survival. The screen flickered, and the forces of the simulation converged in a way that should have crushed Danny's fleet in an instant. Danny didn't flinch. He gripped the controls with a focused intensity, his fingers moving with unbroken precision. The child's eyes never wavered from the screen as his fleet was relentlessly battered by waves of attacks. And yet, through all of it, Danny kept finding ways to fight back, turning every loss into an opportunity, every encounter into a lesson. It was as if he was learning in real time, adjusting not only to the simulation's changes, but to the adversities life had thrown at him. With each passing moment, the Admiral could no longer ignore the truth. Humanity had an unpredictable power that no amount of military might could ever account for. It wasn't about raw strength, technology, or even discipline. It was about the ability to outthink and outmaneuver any challenge, no matter the cost. And that, the Admiral realized, was what made humans so dangerous. For the first time, the Admiral felt something he had never experienced before, a mixture of respect and fear for a species he had once seen as inferior. The simulation was now a game of survival, but Danny had already begun to redefine the very rules of it. In this moment, the Admiral knew one thing with certainty. This child's potential was only a glimpse of what humanity could truly do when pushed to its limits. The final test was set. The Admiral had escalated the simulation beyond anything Danny had encountered so far. The battlefields were no longer confined to simple tactics. Now, the child would have to face a true war, a vast, galaxy-wide conflict with multiple factions and evolving scenarios. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the Admiral watched with growing anticipation as Danny took his seat in front of the console, his small hands gripping the controls. The virtual space unfolded before him, stars twinkling in the distance, planets in orbit, and fleets of alien ships waiting for their orders. Unlike the previous simulations, this one was not a fixed environment. The galaxy was alive, changing in response to Danny's actions. Alien fleets moved across the expanse, mercilessly attacking one another. Space stations blinked in and out of existence, harboring secrets and weapons of unimaginable power. The Admiral's voice rang out, his orders echoing through the ship. Activate full system complexity. Begin Phase 3. Danny didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. For him, this wasn't a daunting task. It was an opportunity to prove his worth, to take on a new challenge. He didn't see the overwhelming forces before him as obstacles. Instead, he saw them as puzzles waiting to be solved. In an instant, the simulation erupted. Alien forces clashed against one another, their weapons blazing through the black void of space. Danny's fleet, a ragtag collection of ships he had pieced together during the course of the game, was small and outmatched. But Danny didn't retreat. He divided his forces, moving them in intricate patterns, like a chess player setting up for an unexpected checkmate. He launched a series of feints, drawing enemy fleets into traps. The Admiral's officers watched, incredulous. The boys' unpredictability was defying every strategy they had modeled into the simulation. With each move, Danny seemed to unravel their calculations. When the enemy ships tried to flank him, he used the galaxy's shifting gravity wells to hide his fleet in a distant asteroid field. When they tried to overwhelm him with firepower, Danny employed an unusual tactic. He used small, seemingly useless ships to create false signals, fooling the enemy into wasting precious resources. It was pure, unadulterated chaos, but it worked. Time and again, the alien forces faltered, their superior strength meaningless against Danny's quick thinking and adaptability. The Admiral's brow furrowed. The boy wasn't just playing a game anymore. He was crafting a new reality, manipulating the simulation in ways the Admiral hadn't anticipated. Each move Danny made seemed to be a direct counter to the cold logic that had governed the simulation up until now. It was as though Danny had tapped into an entirely different dimension of warfare, one that didn't rely on brute force or cold precision, but on imagination, deception, and the ability to stay several steps ahead of your opponent. The simulation's complexity grew with each passing moment. Entire fleets of alien ships descended upon Danny's small group of vessels. The battlefield became a swirling vortex of destruction. The boy's fleet was decimated. For a brief moment, the Admiral thought he had succeeded. Finally, the child had been caught. But then, just as quickly, Danny had turned the tables. He reactivated a cloaking device on one of his remaining ships, slipping it past the enemy sensors. With a series of calculated moves, Danny's small fleet began to dismantle the massive alien warships one by one, like a predator picking apart its prey. The final blow came in the form of an unexpected strike. A surprise attack from the most unlikely of sources. Danny's small remaining fleet breached the enemy's most fortified stronghold, triggering a chain reaction that wiped out the entire opposing force. The simulation ended with Danny's fleet triumphant, having faced impossible odds and overcome them with nothing but wit, audacity, and sheer willpower. The room was silent. The officers stared at the screen in disbelief. Danny had won. Again. The Admiral, however, was no longer simply astonished. He was, for the first time, genuinely afraid. Not because Danny had beaten them, he had expected that, but because he now understood something he hadn't before. The child's ability to think outside the bounds of logic, his refusal to be bound by the rules of conventional warfare, was something far more dangerous than any weapon or fleet. The Admiral stood motionless for a long moment, processing the result. He had entered this test believing that humanity was a weak species, incapable of matching the technological prowess of the galactic civilizations he had conquered. But Danny's victory had shattered that assumption. The boy had outwitted him, not with superior technology or brute strength, but with an untapped power that no algorithm or calculation could predict. For the first time, the Admiral realized that the true strength of humanity lay not in their technology, but in their minds. And that made them the most unpredictable and dangerous species in the galaxy. The simulation chamber was deathly silent. The crew of the alien flagship stood in awe of the results, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The child had won again. Not by force, not through cunning technology, but through something much more primal, a pure, instinctive drive to outthink his adversaries. Danny's strategy was something the Admiral could not have predicted, and as the simulation ended, the Admiral felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his chest, a sense of unease. In all his years of commanding fleets, of crushing civilizations, the Admiral had never encountered anything quite like this. The human child had broken every rule of warfare he knew. What troubled him more was that the child was no longer simply playing the simulation. He was changing the very nature of it, bending its outcomes with his creativity, his ability to see patterns and possibilities where none existed. For a brief moment, the Admiral considered halting the experiment, ending the simulation, and returning Danny to his home. But no, he had invested too much in this, too much time and energy. He needed to understand this human mind, to learn what made it tick, to uncover the potential that lurked beneath the surface of Danny's carefree exterior. "We've underestimated him," the Admiral muttered, his voice more thoughtful than before. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected the simulation to break the child's spirit, to reveal his limitations, but instead, Danny had demonstrated something that no one had ever considered. The child was changing the rules of the game in ways that defied their expectations. The more they pushed, the more Danny seemed to adapt, finding new ways to outsmart them at every turn. "Adjust the simulation parameters," the Admiral ordered, his voice carrying a new edge. "Make it more realistic. Increase the psychological pressure. Let's see how he handles the unknown." The officers hesitated but complied, and the simulation began again. This time, however, there was a new twist. The scenario shifted from a simple tactical battle to something more abstract, an endless maze of alien intrigue, espionage, and psychological warfare. Hidden agendas, betrayal, and doubt began to plague the battlefield. Some of Danny's own ships appeared to betray him, their loyalty in question. The forces of the simulation began to operate on multiple levels, adding layers of uncertainty and deception. For a moment, Danny hesitated. This was different. The unpredictability of the game was heightened now, and the stakes had shifted. No longer was he playing a straightforward strategy game. Now he was facing his own doubts, his own trust in the tools and methods that had served him so well before. But instead of faltering, Danny did what he always did. He kept playing. He grinned as he watched the simulation unfold, navigating through its twists and turns with a childlike energy. To Danny, this was just another puzzle. His fingers moved faster, the commands flowing from him almost instinctively. His ships navigated the treacherous alliances and shifting loyalties, outwitting the program's attempts to break his focus. The more the simulation tried to play tricks on him, the more Danny adapted. His ability to sense patterns, to shift his perspective, and to adapt to an environment where nothing was certain made him a formidable adversary. Meanwhile, the Admiral grew increasingly uneasy as Danny's fleet surged forward, no longer just overcoming the simulation's obstacles, but dissecting them entirely. With every passing second, Danny displayed a brilliance that unsettled the Admiral even more. This child was not only capable of outthinking the simulation, but he was now exploiting its most complicated dynamics, something the Admiral hadn't predicted. This is not possible, one of the officers whispered. We've stacked the odds so heavily against him. Yet he continues to adapt. He's rewriting the game. The Admiral clenched his fists. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had set the ultimate test, but Danny was not just surviving. He was evolving beyond the parameters of the game. It wasn't just that the boy's creativity had disrupted the simulation. It was that Danny was now setting the terms of engagement. He was no longer playing by the rules the Admiral had established. Danny was the one in control. The simulation reached its peak. The final test unfolded. Danny's fleet faced an overwhelming onslaught from all sides. The screen lit up with enemy ships, vast armadas descending with force and precision. The child's ships were outnumbered, and their ammunition was running low. For the first time in the simulation, there was a tangible sense of defeat in the air. The aliens watched as Danny seemed to be trapped in a corner, his back against the wall. Yet instead of succumbing to despair, Danny smiled. He wasn't done yet. Danny's fingers danced over the controls, weaving together his last remaining ships into an unexpected formation. Using the chaos to his advantage, he lured the enemy ships into an ambush, launching a surprise attack from the depths of the galaxy, using the planet's magnetic field to mask his fleet's location. In a stunning turn of events, Danny once again defied the odds, snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. The simulation concluded with an unexpected but undeniable result. Danny had won. The Admiral stood in stunned silence. For a brief moment, he considered what he had learned. This child, this human, had revealed something profound. Something that his empire, with all its military might and precision, could not predict or control. The ability to think beyond the conventional, to rewrite the rules of war in real time, that was humanity's true strength. And that strength, the Admiral now realized, would be a challenge far greater than any alien force he had ever encountered. The Admiral watched in stunned silence as the last remnants of the simulation dissipated from the screen. Danny's fleet stood victorious once more, though the outcome had been anything but predictable. Every officer in the room was in awe of the child's ingenuity, but there was also a growing sense of unease in the air. They had pushed the limits of the simulation beyond reason, and yet Danny had adapted, overcome, and ultimately prevailed at every turn. For the first time in his life, the Admiral felt as though he had been beaten, not by a superior military force, but by the raw, unpredictable potential of a single human mind. The alien military was built on precision, calculation, and control. Their fleets were vast and powerful, their technology unmatched. But Danny, with his wild creativity and intuitive approach, had shown him that there were forces in the universe that couldn't be quantified or contained, forces that weren't bound by logic or even by the rules of warfare. The Admiral turned to his officers, his expression one of quiet contemplation. "This child has changed everything," he said softly. "He hasn't just beaten the simulation. He's shown us that humanity's true strength lies not in their technology, but in their ability to adapt to the impossible, to improvise when all seems lost." One of the officers, his voice trembling, spoke up. "Admiral, we've never encountered a species like this. The child, he doesn't think like us. He doesn't play by any of the rules we know." The Admiral nodded. "No, he doesn't. And that's what makes him dangerous. As he stood there, the weight of the realization pressing down on him, the Admiral couldn't help but wonder what this meant for his empire. For centuries, his people had conquered worlds with technology, with might, and with unyielding precision. They had viewed humanity as nothing more than an insignificant species, an impulsive, emotional race, barely capable of standing up to the advanced civilizations of the galaxy. But Danny's victory had shattered that belief. This child, without the benefit of advanced training, without the cold, calculating intellect that his species had prized, had done something his most skilled commanders could not. He had outwitted them, not by brute force, but through sheer creativity and adaptability. A sudden thought struck the Admiral, one that sent a chill through his spine. What if humanity was capable of this on a massive scale? What if there were entire fleets, entire armies, whose strategies were based not on cold calculation, but on an unpredictable, ever-evolving creativity? What if this child was merely the beginning? For the first time, the Admiral found himself questioning the superiority of his species. It wasn't just the child he feared now. It was the potential of humanity as a whole. The humans he had once viewed as weak, as primitive, were capable of things his kind could never hope to achieve. Their strength lay not in their might, but in their unrestrained ability to adapt and create solutions to problems others couldn't even see. And that, the Admiral realized, was what made them dangerous. He turned back to the screen, where the final score of the simulation blinked in bright letters. Danny's fleet had triumphed once again. There was no denying it. This was no ordinary child. This was a glimpse into the heart of humanity's true potential. "We're not dealing with a race we can conquer," the Admiral said, his voice quieter now, as though the realization had drained the strength from his body. "We're dealing with a race that can defeat us, if we're not careful." The officers around him stood silent, the weight of his words settling in. They had always been the conquerors, the ones who imposed their will on others. But now, they were faced with a terrifying possibility. Humanity wasn't just a species to be subjugated. It was a species capable of changing the very nature of warfare, of turning every rule upside down. And they had seen a glimpse of that potential in a single child. Danny, the boy who had been nothing more than an experiment, had now become the symbol of something much greater, a force that no one in the galaxy could have predicted. As the simulation finally powered down and the lights in the room dimmed, the Admiral stood alone, contemplating the future. Humanity was not to be underestimated, and the galaxy would never be the same.